October 30th, 2023 were distributed to the members of the CAB prior to this meeting for review. May I have a motion to approve the minutes?
A motion.
And the second?
Second.
It's been moved by Peter Henderson and seconded by Tracy Powell that the minutes from the advisory board meeting held on October 30th, 2023 be approved as submitted. We'll take a roll call vote. Tracy Powell,
Yes.
Caroline Pavlovsik,
Yes.
Brian McCray,
Yes.
Peter Henderson,
Yes.
Patania Raby,
Yes.
Rob Johnson,
Yes.
Robert Castaneda.
Yes.
The minutes are approved. The motion passes.
Thank you. We've had another member of the board join us. I believe you're a student. Okay.
We do have Emmanuel Garcia, who is one of our student members who has joined. Welcome.
Okay, we have two presentations that will be made before the CAB. Our first,
Excuse me, Chairperson Raby, we have one other set of minutes which need to be.
oh, I do apologize. Thank you. The minutes from the CAB held on December 12th were distributed also to the members of the CAB prior to this meeting for review. May I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
It's been moved by Vice Chairperson Robert Johnson and seconded by Peter Henderson that the minutes from December 12, 2023 be approved as submitted. Take a roll call vote. Robert Castaneda.
I'm going to abstain because I was not present for that meeting.
Okay. Robert Johnson,
Yes.
Chairperson Raby,
Yes.
Peter Henderson,
Yes.
Brian McCray,
Yes.
Caroline Pavlovsik,
Yes.
Tracy Powell.
Yes.
The minutes are approved as submitted.
Thank you. Okay, so now we do have two presentations that will be made before the CAB. Our first is entitled Safety and Security, and our Chief Safety and
Actually, it's the reverse on the agenda. Sorry, Chairperson Raby.
Righty, so it will be communication.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and our presenter is Brian Steele, the CTA Vice President of Communications Marketing. Mr. Steele.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Appreciate you having me this morning. I'm Brian Steele, Vice President of Communications with CTA. I've been here for about 12 years and have seen a lot of great changes and evolution of the agency. And we're pretty excited about the times that we're facing. Some challenges ahead, to be sure, but we're pretty excited about the things we're going to be doing. I have a brief presentation that I would like to run through. And then obviously I look forward to answering any questions that you have at the end of the presentation. The communication department is actually a pretty small business unit within CTA as compared to some of the other business units, but we do really interface with just about every department in CTA in one way or the other. Our group, communications, these are the main basic areas of focus. We handle our media relations, public affairs, social media, and the other items there at the bottom. I'd like to make a quick run through of these just to give you a sense of the breadth and depth of what the communications department handles. Our communications group really tries to follow these principles. A lot of us in the communications department come from a media background. I used to be a newspaper reporter and editor, and we take it very seriously: truthfulness, transparency, being responsive to customers, trying to be informative, trying to be helpful. I think the last item is something that we've been especially trying to do since we're emerging from the pandemic: listening.
Mr. Steele, I think that there's a technology issue because your presentation is showing up on the screen.
Apologize for that.
Oh, it's okay. Just pause for a moment. Thank you.
Much better. Thank you. So everything that we do, whether it's doing internal communications, external communications, public relations, social media, we try to follow these guiding principles. Our media relations group, we are on call 24/7. I am routinely accustomed to getting calls at 3 a.m, 10 p.m, addressing whatever the situation might be. We have a reputation among the Chicago Media Corps media contingent as being a really responsive media group. CTA obviously is a 24/7 operation. The news cycle is 24/7, so we really try to be as responsive as possible. We issue a lot of press releases. About every week, we're issuing a press release on all the things the agency is doing. We organize our press conferences, we do proactive media pitches about subject matters, and we try to cultivate reporter and editor relationships, knowing who the individual reporters are, know what the expectations of their media outlets are for deadlines, for the type of information they receive, how they receive it, be it over the phone or in writing. So we really try to have a close relationship so that we're being responsive to those outlets. Our public affairs group produces all of our collateral material. So any brochure, flyer that you see has been produced by our department. We handle a lot of our outreach events. One of these most successful ones was what you see in the picture. We hosted events that we called Ask CTA, where we had some of the senior leadership at CTA go out to rail stations and bus terminals and greet customers and talk about issues that were on their mind. And then we also manage the CTA's website. We do a lot of information and awareness campaigns. You'll see a lot of them pop up on our social media channels, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But we also do our public awareness campaigns. In the lower right corner is one that we launched, I think it was late last year. It was an updated version of our rail safety awareness campaign. Rail safety awareness is something that's obviously a high priority for the agency. And we wanted to come up with a way to really come up with some eye-catching visuals and copy to really get people to focus on that particular issue. So instead of just taking an approach that was kind of more regulatory, saying don't go on the tracks, we came up, it's kind of hard to see here, but we came up with a graphic novel version of the messaging. And then we've got some other creatives as well. So our team is the one that worked to put those together along with our marketing department. Social media, we lean very heavily into. We have the largest local government Twitter account. We have one of the largest Facebook accounts. Our Instagram account just passed 34,000 followers. And late last year, I think it was last fall, we launched our TikTok account. In keeping with the spirit of that particular social media channel, it's kind of lighter fare, more entertaining, a lot of memes, things of that nature. But we're finding that it's a really good way for us to engage with and hopefully inform our customers. My department's also responsible for customer information. So every sign that you see on the rail system and in bus terminals is produced by our department. As mentioned earlier, we do our brochures and collateral material. We have an in-house graphics team. We have an in-house reproduction team that does our printing. We handle some of our digital properties, and we're also involved in service alerts. There are two types of service alerts: planned service disruption, unplanned service disruption. Planned is construction, reroutes, things of that nature. And if you've been to a rail station or a bus terminal, you'll see little piece of paper saying service alert this weekend, Green Line will be running on the inner loop track or whatever the case may be. So our department puts that out. And then we also help our control center develop the text copy for the digital alerts that we put out. We have a digital alert system for unplanned service disruptions that's put out by CTA's control center. Those alerts, which are using a web-based system, are syndicated to a number of places. They go out to email and text subscribers. We have over 96,000 email and text subscriptions for alerts about various rail lines and bus routes. They syndicate to our digital screens at the rail stations. They syndicate to a Twitter account that we have called CTA Alert at CTA Alert, which is a new account that we started last year, focused solely on alerts. So we really do try to put customer information out via a number of channels so that we're catching people at various points in their journeys. My department oversees the customer service department. We have an 800 number and an email address. The images you see is the feedback form that we have on our website. We get up to 400 contacts from customers a day. Now, some of those are pretty routine. Hey, I need a new Venture card, and we'll forward it them to the Venture office. Some are asking for travel directions. Some are reporting complaints or concerns. My bus didn't show up, my train was 20 minutes late, things of that nature. We use a CMS, content management system. It's actually the city's 3-on-1 system to track and respond to all the complaints that we get. So this is a very high traffic business unit that really is an important point of contact with our customers. One of the things that my group does is try to tell the CTA story. I think a lot of our customers are familiar with the day-to-day. Okay, they run trains, they run buses, sometimes they're on time, sometimes they're late, sometimes they have challenges with service, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot more about CTA than just the day-to-day service that we put out. Among the things that we've been touting over the last couple of years is CTA being an industry leader. Some of you may be familiar with our EIP. I'm sorry, put the acronym there. It's the Equity and Infrastructure national program that CTA and President Carter was one of the first transit agencies to sign on to. It's a national effort to really promote equity in infrastructure projects and investments across the country. We've been telling the story a lot about our recruitment and hiring successes. Every time we have a job fair, we put out a press release to promote it, and we tend to get a good bit of media coverage about the successes that we're having and the challenges that we still have in recruitment and hiring. We always like to recognize and celebrate our employees. In the lower right, you'll see Brandon. We did a campaign recently to just promote various workers in the various departments across CTA. We did this as both an internal campaign as an external campaign. And you're going to see some cool stuff coming up next week. Yeah, next week you'll see it. On Monday, March 18th is it's National Transit Driver Appreciation Day. But we expanded it to have it Transit Employee Appreciation Day. So starting next week on our social media channels, you're going to see a lot of cool videos, a lot of cool engagement with the men and women who keep this agency running each and every day. Our milestones, we always try to promote. We reach a ridership milestone. We celebrate an anniversary when we accomplish something. Again, trying to churn out this information so our customers have a holistic understanding of what the agency is doing. Modernization, of course, is something that we lean very heavily into. When we did the Forest Park branch rebuild last year, we really expanded our typical suite of customer information activities. We did brochures, we did flyers, we did in-person outreach at the various impacted stations. But we expanded beyond that. We did a long-form video where we interviewed CTA leaders talking about their various aspects of involvement in the project. And it really seemed to connect with customers. We got a lot of positive feedback from it. We had people asking us a lot of really good questions. Hey, you guys said this, how are you going to do that? So it was a really good two-way customer engagement. And as I mentioned, we celebrate our history and heritage. In the lower right, you'll see two of the trains that are part of our heritage fleet, which are our vintage buses and rail cars. That's something that really resonates with customers, and they really love it when we bring those out onto the system. I mentioned earlier, we keep up a regular cadence of announcements. We're constantly putting out press releases and information about what we do. We talk to reporters and media. So instead of just waiting for them to come with questions, we will go to them. You'll be seeing next week. I can't tell you what it is, but next week you'll be seeing a story about something we're working with a reporter. An issue that we're having some challenges with, and we want to talk to them about it. And then reporter briefings. When we do bigger announcements, we'll do what are called embargo briefings. We'll brief reporters beforehand so they have the basic information so that when we make the announcement, they're able to publish their story. So we do this every year for our budget. We always talk to reporters beforehand, to let them know the basic frame of the budget. And we've started doing that with other subject matters. We want people to understand what the CTA does, why we do it, and why it's important. I think a great example of this is this escalator off PSA. Several years ago, we started seeing a lot of social media traffic after Cubs and Sox games saying, why did CTA shut down the escalators? Don't they know there's a baseball game and there's big crowds? Well, we realized what people didn't know is we do that for a reason. It's been shown time and again that operating escalators, when you have a huge crush of people, such as primarily end of a sporting event. It can damage the escalators. It can create safety hazards. It impedes the ingress and egress of customers. So it's not an efficient way to do things. So we turn off the escalators and actually lock them. Our infrastructure maintenance group locks them at the top and bottom so they can't move. So we did these basic, we call them car cards. We put them up on the barriers around the escalators saying, this is why we turned it off. And we actually did some media outreach about it. So people understood, okay, so the CTA does know that there's a baseball game and there is a good reason why they're doing what we're doing. One of the biggest areas is down here. You all are familiar with our interactive performance metrics reports. This is something that President Carter tasked the group with last year. We've always put our performance metrics on CTA website. We've done so since 2006, I believe. So not always, but for a long time. They were static PDFs, small type, hard to read, to do any type of analysis, right? You get just a snapshot in time. Okay, here's where they are this month. Well, President Carter said there's got to be a better way to present this information. Let's make it interactive. Let's add to the information. Let's give people the opportunity to look at not only how we're doing now, but how does that compare to 6 months ago? How does that compare to, I think we go back 13 months. So the performance metric is something that we point customers to a lot. We point media to. I've actually walked reporters through this to let them know, here's what you're looking at. Here are the inputs that we use to measure this. So again, just part of our efforts to help people understand why we do what we do. Customer engagement is an area that we're also focused on, and we're pretty excited about some new stuff that we're going to be doing this year. In the next 2 weeks, you're going to see a new video series that we're launching called Ask CTA. It's basically a video FAQ that the idea that we wanted was for it to be very organic and very real. So it's not scripted at all. We went out to rail stations and bus terminals, just approach random people saying, excuse me, we're from CTA. We're doing this series, seeing if people have questions about the agency. Is there anything you'd like to ask us? So we took their questions verbatim, and then we came back to our shop and went to officials in various departments saying, hey, one of the first questions was about bus bunching. Why do buses bunch? See all these buses crammed up. Why does it happen? So we went to one of our person in our service planning department that explained the phenomenon of bus bunching. We have one about ghost trains and ghost buses, in which our head of external electronic communications explains why that happens. So we're pretty excited about that. We've got an e-newsletter that we'll be launching later in the year. We're going to use our digital screens at the rail stations for more informational content. Right now, it has a lot of good information, train status, delays, service alerts, things of that nature, but we're going to start using them for more informational snippets. We're going to be revamping that web page that I showed you from our feedback page earlier. And then last month, I believe it was last month, we started what will be a series of roundtables with various community members. We've, connected with civic groups, transportation related agencies, transit advocates. We try to cast a really wide net of people where we're going to be sitting down every couple of months, doing what I'm doing now, giving just a basic overview of things, and then most importantly, taking their questions and input. So the first one was good. It was shorter than we wanted to be because we had some technical issues, but it was a really good start of what we hope will be a long and fruitful dialogue. I appreciate you taking the time to listen, and I'd love to hear some of your questions, comments, ideas.
Thank you. That was really great. Really great to learn about some of the nuances of the communication. So I do follow social media, and I've been seeing some more interesting posts. So it's to know that that's the direction. And I guess for our purposes as being this group of citizens that are wanting to also be more connected to the community, I guess it might be helpful for us to think about ways that we can support this as well and how we can take part in some of this, just, because we're, these are just some thoughts that we've been having about how can we be better connected and be a better service to our constituents, if you will. So, and that might require a follow-up conversation with you, but I think that's just something that's been on our radar about how we can be in better communication with the public. I'll pass it on.
Robert Castanet.
Two things. First of all, congratulations. I think every time I travel on CTA, the signage is always very aesthetically pleasing, well branded, it's easy to see. So I commend you on that work. It's definitely noticeable. My wife loves New York. We travel to New York a lot. We use public transportation there. When we go to Bulls Sox games, it's the train race, right? And everybody's cheering for their line, pink line, purple line, red line. And in New York, when you see a lot of like gear, right? Where people take pride in like, this is the line I ride, or this is my bus, or just transit in general. Do we have that in Chicago? Do we have like, can people actually buy like CTA branded?
Yeah, I do.
We do, but first to your comment about the Bulls video, we actually worked with the Bulls marketing team on that years ago. They approached us and we thought it was a great co-promotional for them to use. We actually gave them a, oh goodness, what's the term for it? Not a right of entry, but permission to use.
Yes.
Our image. We're actually doing that with another sports team that I can't reveal, but you'll see it on that team's scoreboard this season, later on the season. To your question about the merchandise, ctagifts.com. The CTA contracts with an outside vendor who's actually the same vendor who does the New York City gifts and apparel. And we sell a wide variety of CTA branded items using our officially licensed branding identity. Typical stuff that you might imagine, t-shirts, hats, vintage stuff. I think we still offer this. One of the most popular ones for years was the shower curtain with the rail lines on it. Some of you may remember that. We actually started a line. I mentioned earlier our vintage trains and buses. Well, I'm a huge fan of vintage trains and buses, not surprisingly. So I said, let's pursue something with our heritage fleet. So we started offering our t-shirts with logos, the old CTA logos, even some of our predecessor company logos, and those have been pretty popular. So CTA Gifts is our official gift store. One thing about CTA Gifts that's great, again, getting back to old trains and buses, a portion of the proceeds from CTA Gifts supports our heritage fleet program. So we, that money goes to help celebrate one of the CTA's most revered assets.
And the other thing I have is just a little more practically, in the neighborhood, right? You mentioned that you handle communications for both planned and unplanned service interruptions. So like there may be something like, oh, this organization is going to have like a Christmas event, and we know that they're going to close down the street, and we know it's a bus route, but yet we don't see like the signage because maybe the CTA doesn't know, right? How can we yeah, just stuff like that, right? How can we be more helpful in being proactive? You're right, because then once that event happens, the street's closed for like 2 hours, buses can't get through, the white car eventually comes. How long are the streets going to be closed? Eventually they reroute. When we see these things happening proactively in community, how can we better support CTA in making sure that you're aware of these types of planned, service interruptions?
That's a great question. For any permitted street closure, you probably know the Chicago Department of Transportation issues the public way use permits. So for anything that's going to be anything more than a couple hours, a permit is issued. We CTA get those permits. Putting out alerts for bus reroutes has been a challenge because, as you know, 99% of our bus stops don't have any digital screens that show alerts. So we're left with paper alerts. We have a good process in place, and we do publish literally hundreds of paper alerts for impacted bus routes. We print them in this building. We put them down. If you look at the table outside of our security desk, you'll see a table there with a bunch of envelopes in it. Those are the alerts. Please don't take them that are going out to the various bus routes. Then the bus management team puts those up. But those are oftentimes taped up, sometimes with string. I guess my point is we always try to do that, and I think we're successful most of the time, but you're right, it is a challenge. We are working on and I can't speak to the details of it because a different department's working on it, but new systems for disruption management to provide better real-time alerts for buses. Now, we do also publish the planned reroutes on our website. If you go to the alerts portion of transitchicago.com, you will see all the planned things for both the rail lines and the bus lines. You select your line or route and you'll see, oh, there's going to be this reroute there. So it's a system that works pretty well right now, but you're absolutely right. There's room for improvement. And to your question about helping us, I mean, even just simple emails to our customer service, contacting me to make sure that we're aware of it. I will say that our group that does the alerts, it's our publications department is what we call it. They meet multiple times a week with our service planning group and the operations group to know where this stuff is going to be happening. So for example, next Saturday is the river dying, I believe. There's going to be a lot of downtown reroutes, right? Rail should be largely not impacted, but a lot of the downtown bus routes will be impacted. So they've already met and are already determining what alerts, what paper alerts are going to go up at the bus stops along those impacted routes. So we do our best to stay on top of all that, but if there's something that you know that's big, and this for all of you, if there's something big in your community, a quick email to us, a reminder, XYZ Fest is going to be this weekend. Just want to make sure they have alerts for that. I can tell you for the larger street fests, those we know about well enough in advance because obviously those have a really long lead time. So I don't think you should see an issue with something like Belmont Sheffield is one of the early season ones. Retro on Roscoe was a later summer one. Oops. So I think for most of those, we're pretty well informed, but if there is something that you want us to double check or be sure about, an email or phone call is a great idea and would be welcome.
Thank you.
We'll take other questions from CAB members. Emmanuel Garcia.
I have no questions, but I think the presentation was great and I love the publications I see in the CTA row. I always see them and I always find them very curious and something that makes me smile sometimes, just seeing them.
Good.
Rob Johnson.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you for the presentation, very informative. And our household can vouch for the CTA gift shop. We have a system map beach towel that is it's a big hit. So I did have a couple questions. You mentioned the high volume press releases you guys are putting out. Globally, I'm wondering, is it mostly to the media or on your appropriate page on your website, or do you work with I guess the word appropriate, understanding that this could get very unwieldy very quickly, like stakeholder groups? And to put a more specific point on it, you know, when there are campaigns at Metra or changes at Metra or just something they want to promote, they actually have they contract out with an agency and they proactively approach us at BOMA. And it's kind of, you know, they give us the 10,000-foot briefing and they give us the press release and they give us maybe like, you know, a couple of snazzy pictures or something.
Mm-hmm.
And we will then, you know, put it in an appropriate format, and then we will send it out as part of like our news to our members. And I think it's helpful, one, because it's another channel that you're getting the information out through. And also a perfect example is because the information had been given to us, right? There was a very upset employee of one of the buildings saying something to the effect of, oh, Metra is changing their fares because they want to punish downtown workers, right? And we were able to say, no, that's not what's happening, before things like escalated. And who knows where things go these days, right? It takes one tweet or something to catch on, and now you've got a headache. Do you guys do anything similar like that? I've worked with CTA in that capacity, but it hasn't been through communications. It's been more through really happenstance often, or like just pre-existing personal, professional relationship.
To your question, we do that. good enough. And we're going to be doing it more. 3-4 months into the pandemic, one of the projects that President Carter asked us to work on was a document to explain to stakeholders, your organization was among them, about all the things that we were doing, related to cleaning, related to PPE and employee protections, related to service. We put together a really nice brochure. I don't remember what we titled it. But we made sure we distributed it to you, the chamber, business organizations, the state creator, I don't remember their name. I'm so sorry. Anyway, we did that. And we've done that for some other things. Related to the press releases, we have a number of distribution lists for press releases. We have a global one that goes to everyone. We have one that's just for TV. We have one that's just for traffic reporters. We have one that's just for industry. I don't know. I will need to check if stakeholder groups like the ones you referred to are on that list. I will say we do post everything to the website because we want to have that visibility. But that's passive, right? Somebody has to go to the website and see that release. What you're talking about and what we've tried to do, and I think this engagement event that we had last month is an example of it, is just sitting down and having the face-to-face two-way dialogue. One of the things that we've also done in the past is we'll write little snippets about subject matters. We did it for the Red Purple Modernization Project. We did it actually for the Forest Park branch rebuild. Just little overall general informational paragraphs, and we sent it out like the stakeholders for the Forest Park project. We sent it to the IMD. We sent it to I'm sorry, I'm forgetting who was out there. A bunch of stakeholders out there, but IMD was an important one because they channeled it to all their various entities. So you raise a good point. It's something that we recognize, because issuing a press release to the media, and one of the media is great, right? They're an absolutely vital part. And I'm a big fan of the media, despite, some things that they say about us, right? I believe in the media. I'm a fervent First Amendment person. It used to be my career, right? So it's something very meaningful to me. Media can only cover so much, right? And if we put out something like, we're adding some bus service to 2 routes, that's not something you're going to see on the 10 o'clock news, right? They just don't have the bandwidth for it. So we do need to do a better job of that more targeted constituent and stakeholder outreach. And we're in the process of doing so. And any ideas that you have, including the ones that you've mentioned here, or any of you have, would love to hear those.
Thank you. Sorry, and I just had one more question about the feedback form page. You mentioned you get all sorts of feedback through that.
Mm-hmm.
When an example you provided is, my bus is 20 minutes late or something like that. What's the turnaround on that? Is that something where, my bus is 20 minutes late, I put it in the feedback form and I can expect, a timely response? Was that kind of like, we're sorry for the inconvenience a day or two later, and not that I necessarily think that's bad. I'm just wondering the utility of of that particular form of communication.
Mm-hmm. Well, any feedback any customer has about anything is important. Even if it's something that's kind of inspecific, you guys stink. Okay. I'm not sure that we would respond to that. We tend to respond to things like somebody says my bus is 20 minutes late. In terms of response time, it really kind of depends on what information we get, because we will, for example, if you say, my bus is 20 minutes late, we may email you back and say, what bus? And what time of day were you traveling?
Right.
And if the customer gets back to us, then we will go to our bus operators group and say, hey, we had a complaint from March 10th at whatever time it is, 11:43 a.m. that the 29 state was late. Can you tell us, was there some type of issue with that? So we do try to get that. Now, I'll be honest, sometimes it's hard to get that detail.
Right.
In that case, we'll get back to the customer and say, we appreciate you sharing this. This is not the experience you should have had. We've let our bus operations group know about this. Sometimes if you get one complaint about something, one, it doesn't necessarily systemic issue. But you start getting 2 and 3 and 4 complaints, and we know that because we have a way to sort and filter all these. That's when we go to the service group. I personally have done that. I won't name the name, but there's a Chicago reporter who is a transit user who always calls me like, my bus is late, my train is late, not always, but has sometimes in the past. And this person will only call me when it's happened a couple times. And more than once, I've looked into it. And sure enough, there was one, I found out it was, I don't want to say the route because I'll give away who the reporter was. This person's route, there was, I don't remember what the issue was. I think it was just deployment for that day. And during that hour, ridership had risen during that particular hour of the commute, and our service was not meeting it. So I talked to our bus operations folks saying, what's the chances of getting another bus scheduled? And sure enough, they got another bus scheduled. And the reporter said, yeah, I've noticed a difference. So we try to respond to customers. I don't know the time that it takes. I would have to research that and get back to you. We do try to be timely with it, but sometimes if we are having a tough time getting information, it might take a couple days. And not every customer who contacts us asks us to respond. Sometimes they just want to let us know. I looked at one this morning where a customer said, I just wanted you to know about this. I'm not seeking response. Okay. And, we sent, thank you for sending it. We'll look into it. But, the feedback that we get from this forum, even if some of it's in specific, it is helpful for us because we do track it. We do provide reports to the bus garages and rail terminals. We have, President Carter spoken before at our board meetings about what we call our daily flash meeting, where a whole group, 30 plus people, managers of all the various departments get together and review the previous day's performance. What went on with bus service, what went on with rail service, what went on with incidents, what went on with mechanical failures, what went on with this and that. And one part of that is what is our customer feedback trends? So we will say, yeah, we got 4 complaints about bus service. There was no common routes, or maybe we got 4 complaints about bus service, 3 of which were on the 77 Belmont. So that type of feedback does help inform not only our awareness, but any action that we might take to help address future issues.
Thank you.
Aiden Keith?
Yeah, thanks so much for the presentation. The first thing I just wanted to say, kudos on the service alerts. Like, I know a lot of people who take the train, and the one thing that everyone's like, this is stellar, is the service alerts on Twitter or text or calls, whatever, like that is absolutely great. I mean, sometimes it's amazing, like the train will stop and then like 2 minutes later we get an alert like, oh, there's, something on the track ahead. It's really great. The other thing I wanted to say is I think one thing that some people struggle with especially the stations downtown for the trains is signage regarding like transfers. So when you have like a station that has multiple exits, there's sometimes signage about like, oh, this is the northwest side, this is the northeast side. But there's not always like, oh, this is how you transfer to the, whatever, the jump, and I think recently there was work done on maybe the Grand Blue Line station that started to add some of that stuff. That's great. It's super helpful. Even as like someone who takes the train all the time, sometimes I'm struggling, like, I don't know which one to go out to get on that bus. So I think more of that kind of stuff, like the Grand Blue Line station would be great, especially for people who aren't native to the city or who don't take the train that often. And that kind of stuff is super helpful, especially like, a lot of people to get to Soldier Field, right? Like they might take the red line in and then take the bus to Soldier Field or to Fire Games or whatever. And I think signage with that would be super helpful. And sometimes it's just confusing. The existing signage is not super clear on how to do that. So that'd be my one piece of feedback.
Well, there's great feedback and thank you. Our general manager of signage, that's something that he is really, really focused on. I don't know how recently you've been to the 95th Street terminal, but we started a new program there in which we use letter designations to designate an area, a bus stop area that serves multiple bus routes. So instead of, having signs saying, oh, the 77 is here, the 80 is here, the 79 is here, just super text heavy, we say K, stop K is where the stops are. And then you go to stop K and it has the sign that will list the route. So that's just one of a couple different efforts, but I would definitely mention that to them. Transfer signage is tough because, the path is different. At a lot of stations, right? Sometimes it's a very easy to get customer path. Sometimes it's not. But for example, the transfer south line station, not the easiest, right? Because you've got multiple levels and it's not intuitive. And you're right, somebody's not familiar with it would have a challenge. So I know our signage department is continually working on what they call the breadcrumb signage trail, so that at every point throughout your process, you're getting information. Possibly the best example, and sorry, I'm going kind of far afield on this answer. Last year, we worked really closely with the good folks at the O'Hare Airport to improve signage. And the signage we had up there had been up there for 2 decades or something, and it sort of worked, but we would see, we were out there observing people like, where do I go to the train, right? It wasn't super intuitive. So next time you're there, look at the things that we put in place. We have window shade, the tall window shade banners on the baggage claim level, leading you to the escalators and stairs, the tunnels that lead from the CTA station to the individual concourses, individual terminals. We've got breadcrumb signage. So I think that's probably our most recent example of a really successful, it's not a transfer per se, but it's the same type of principle. So I will talk to our signage group to see if we can do more of that. And if there are any specific locations that you're aware of in which there's a deficit, definitely let us know about that so we can focus.
Well, yeah, I think it was a similar, Grand Blue Line stop was a similar concept as the 95th Red Line, where you had, I think it's numbers rather than letters maybe, but like having multiple locations for bus stops. And that's great because it really, the path is a lot clearer for people. So I think people appreciate that.
So, thank you.
Peter Henderson?
Wonderful presentation. A lot of my questions were already answered, but me personally, I'm a big fan of CTA signage. So I love the work that you guys are doing, putting these different perspectives out to different groups and different people all over the city of Chicago. And that's good because, like he mentioned, and you mentioned about O'Hare and 95th, all of those things there. Yes, you may see that, like the Jackson Street pedway, red and blue. People are asking me, now how do I transfer to the red? Now you can't get that, so you're gonna have to go to Washington and transfer to the red line and take that to Howard or take that to 95th. And a lot of people don't see that, but it is good. And I appreciate the work that you guys are doing to get the signage to make more people aware of how to take the public transportation system. Because yes, you can take it, but there are ways that sometimes you get lost. And then that brings astray to people that not feel comfortable taking it anymore because, every day I take it, I'm gonna get lost, so signage and wayfinding is 100% a great way to get people involved and all the different presentations and videos that you guys are doing, making people aware of the employees and how they're coming to do their job to help you get to where you're going. So I appreciate that. And thank you again for a wonderful presentation.
Of course, thank you.
Ryan McCray?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation today. I guess I had a few questions, but I can't wait for the employee appreciation stuff next week. I wanted to ask if there will be any new rail or bus operators in those classes featured in that.
Yes, but without giving you I'll give you two-word clue, time lapse. Yes, you will see some. We're not going to interview or identify them because the main video that we have for this is really an overall CTA one. But yeah, you'll see their faces, but there's not interviews with them. We're not going to have interviews in our main TAD video. We're going to be doing some other profiles on social media. I don't know if we're going to have new people involved. I don't know. I haven't seen the list, the roster of people that we're going to be interviewing them. We do take the opportunity to promote our field employees in a couple different ways. We do social media posts pretty frequently, not just related to Transit Employee Appreciation Day, but for other things throughout the year. We are working on a update to a campaign that we did a couple years ago called Say Hello To, which featured a bunch of rail and bus field employees and a little bit of background about who they were and what their interests were. The motivation behind that particular campaign was actually we were starting to see a little bit of an uptick in employee assaults. And I remember sitting and talking to my colleagues saying, how can somebody go and assault real or bus operator who's just trying to get them where they're going? It makes no sense. And I said, that's somebody's mom, that's somebody's brother, that's somebody's friend. And I was like, wait a minute. And that was our campaign, like meet John, he's a brother, he's a church elder, he's a softball player. Like the idea was to humanize them and promote the good work that they do. So I can check to see if we've got any of the new employees in the TED stuff, but our TED stuff this year is less about the individual employees than it is about the overall job categories and the breadth and depth. I think a lot of people, when they think of CTA, they think of train of bus operators. But obviously, there's a lot of other personnel that go behind keeping the service strong.
Okay. Yeah,
It's a great question.
yeah, and I'm sure like there's just a lot of focus on that, on the operator stagnating. So to respond to our interest to the issues we're raising, I think something like that would be very helpful.
Okay.
I wanted to ask, I've had maybe a little bit different experiences with the CTA alerts. I wanted to talk about the syndication you said. Is that a fully automated process?
Yes, well, automated with a person sitting at a control panel. I'll tell you how it works. We have a CMS at our control center. So I don't know if you remember with our control center, it's basically air traffic control CTA. Big room with twice the size of, 3 times the size of this room with big video monitors. It has a rail control section, it has a bus control section, it has a power control section, it has a security section. So when something starts to develop, there's conversation in the room, and there's train trackers different from what we use public facing. They're hooked into our track circuit so we can see the movement of trains, how long it's been, et cetera, et cetera. It will be noticed that that train's been standing 5 minutes, or what should be a 5-minute headway has now turned into a 10-minute headway. So at that point, the information is provided to what's called the communications coordinator. They go into the CMS, and we have a drop down that populates all the common information, right? Trains are standing at blank station on the blank line. Select the drop down, select that. And then we have a whole list category of reasons: due to a sick passenger, due to a mechanical issue, due to a medical emergency on the tracks, due to, I'm trying to remember some of the other things. So the person enters in all that information and then tries to enter in if there's any alternative service options. So we try to publish the first alert. The timing of the alert depends on the time of day and it depends on. We work from a sheet called headway impact matrix. So a 5-minute delay on the red line at the height of the AM rush is different than a 5-minute delay on the red line at 9 o'clock at night, obviously. So the alert during the rush hour will come out sooner than probably something in the evening, because remember, the evenings are going to have longer headways. So the person plugs in all the information and basically just hits send, and it syndicates everywhere. As we get updates about the status of that incident, that same communications coordinator will go into that alert that was published and update it. Okay, sometimes you'll see a lot when we have what's called a line cut, which is basically trains are stopped completely. We'll put that out as a major incident, service disruption. As we address whatever the situation is, we will slowly bring back parts. So sometimes we'll do a line cut from station A to station F. Slowly we'll restore, now it's only A to D, and now it's only A to B. So we publish alerts each time as that changes. The timelines of the alerts, we've really, and our control center is pretty good about it.
Thank you. I think
okay.
it sounds like the decision to publish these alerts are fully dependent on one coordinator.
No, not at all. No, it's dependent upon the news that's coming out of our control center. There are multiple people in our control center who are assessing what's going on in the system, right? So the consensus is they look up on the train tracker, that red line train's been standing, it hasn't moved in 5 minutes, it's AM rush, we've got to get an alert. So yeah, the control is the person responsible for it, but the decision is the group in the control center.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
And then I also wanted to ask about the 888 Your CTA line.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like this is the line where people are going to call if they have any kind of complaints or concerns on trains and buses that are currently running.
Mm-hmm.
and I believe I heard earlier that you're not entirely sure about the response times to issues that you hear through this.
No, I'm sorry. That was, the question was about the response times to the feedback emails. I can tell you the response time to the calls. I don't have my email in front of me and I left my phones over there. Our call time response is generally less than 20 seconds. So within 20 seconds of the call coming into our IVR, we've got one of our operators on the phone with them. Now, there are times that it's going to go a little bit longer than that, but our average response time is about 20 seconds.
Okay, is that that sounds good, but I guess I'm specifically asking, that almost sounds a little unbelievable if I were to say like, hey, I'm on this red line at Roosevelt Station, I'm heading north, and someone just spilled a bunch of stuff on the train. Can you get someone up here to clean it? Like, do you know how long that response would take?
I don't know that we track that. I will say if we get any call in real time, and I should note that a lot of calls we get to 888 are not real, like I'm on a train and this is happening at this second. We don't tend to get a lot of those. We tend to get a lot of after the fact, like, hey, I took my trip this morning and my train was late. If we do get any real time thing, particularly something related to a safety and security issue, we immediately let both our control center know and our safety and security department. So if the caller gets that, they will either hold that call and get on another line and alert, or they'll end that call, assuming that there's not some type of issue, a safety and security issue, and then they will reach out to operations folks saying, we just got this call at needs to be addressed. The response time for 8-minute safety security is very, very quick. Basically, as soon as we get off the phone with the caller, we're alerting the personnel out in the field.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm looking forward to our next presentation. That's all I had.
Ryan Parnell.
Yeah, thanks for the great presentation. I echo a lot of what my colleagues are saying. The one question I have, the president of the CTA set out a very ambitious ridership goal at City Council a few weeks ago. And I feel like a lot of what we're talking about here is people who are, already taking the train, and how do we communicate with them? How does the communications department see their role in like bringing new riders, people who have kind of given up on the CTA, whether it's from a bad experience, bad press, whatever it might be, to come back into the fold of the CTA? Like how do these new initiatives kind of capture new riders that aren't taking the system right now?
That's a great question. We work in conjunction, our planning and innovation group, about exactly that type of thing. How do we bring back customers who have gone away from the system for a variety of reasons? We do know when you look at our ridership, the world has changed, obviously. People are not in the office 5 days a week. They're not commuting 5 days a week. So we've lost that ridership. Transit agencies across the country are experiencing the same thing. And transit agencies across the country are also looking for, well, how do we get back to where we were? CTA has seen, and we've actually issued press releases on this, our ridership during summer festivals and sporting events in the summer has been really, really close to pre-pandemic levels. There was a couple times last summer where, I can't remember if it was Cubs or Sox, we were like 99% of pre-pandemic ridership. So we know that we're really strong in those. We've seen an increase in off-peak, right? People aren't necessarily doing a 9 to 5 work anymore and commuting during those peak AM and PM hours. So we've seen on some routes and lines an increase in midday and off-peak ridership and evening ridership. Putting out the information about what CTA is doing, I think, is really helpful in that regard. CTA, we're facing challenges. There's no question about that, right? We've been upfront about those challenges. We've told people that we were committed to addressing them. Each time we've done something to address it, we've announced that. You're going to be getting, I can't hint at it too much, but next week you're going to be seeing a big announcement related to that. There is still a perception that trains and buses aren't running, and that's not true. One of the reasons we did the dashboard, performance metric dashboard, is so people can see what we're doing and how we're doing. And when you look at the service levels that we're putting out on our bus and rail lines, you will see that, I don't have the most recent numbers in front of me, but roughly high 90% of our bus service is being provided and mid to upper 80% of rail service. Now, is that good? Yeah, it's pretty good. Is it good enough? No, it's not. Right. And we've said that and we recognize that and we've tried to communicate that. And again, next week you'll get some more information related to that. So I think helping people understand what CTA is, what we're doing and why we're doing it is helpful. This Ask CTA video series is just one small part of telling the story and answering customers' questions. If I'm a customer who sees bus bunching, I'm frustrated. Why are there all these buses? That stinks, right? That's silly. Why can't they fix that? Well, hopefully when they see this video, they'll get a better understanding and be like, oh, okay, I sort of get what the issue is. Maybe I'll look at it in a slightly different light. Like what we want to make sure that our customers have is enough information for them to make informed decisions about their travel. And then secondarily, to understand why the agency is making the decisions that it is. It's why you've seen us talk so much and why we issued so many press releases about hiring, right? Our workforce shortages are at the heart of our service issues, particularly on the rail side, not so much anymore on the bus side, particularly on the rail side. And there's a lot of really good questions about, well, why is that? What are you doing about it? And shouldn't you be doing this, right? Those are all really good questions that we always try to answer and try to communicate about. So I hope that answers your question. I think we play a part in a larger informative dialogue to help people understand the agency.
Thanks.
Caroline Pavlicek.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. I was glad to see that you mentioned the roundtables with community groups. I actually participated in the first one, and I will say, just as a member of a community group, it felt very difficult to kind of get a word in, just because everyone was all like thrown on one call. We didn't really have a lot of that direct dialogue with CTA, and then eventually we all got kicked off because it was like a free Zoom call and it was time limited. And I guess in response to that, I think it would be helpful to have more like one-on-one meetings with like the CTA and members of the community group. And I was just wondering if there's any interest in doing that from the CTA side?
To your comment about the Zoom call, 100%. I set that Zoom call up under my account, which is an unlimited account. We had technical issues, you remember at the beginning. So a person without my knowledge set up a Zoom under their account, which only has a 40-minute limit. So you're right, that didn't go as smoothly as we thought. We were able, as you noticed, to answer a lot of the questions people threw in the chat. And our thinking behind that was, if one person has a question, there's a good chance that other people in that group, like similar to this dialogue here, I think a lot of the questions that you're all asking individually are probably other questions that other people had. So you're right. There was a lot of people on that call, and we definitely didn't have enough time to get to everyone and to certainly answer all the questions, because there were some questions that went unanswered. So are we interested in doing more of that? Yes. Are we interested in looking at smaller groups to do that? Yes. My colleague Denise Barreto, who heads up our equity and engagement group, she and I talk about this, ways to do more. And forums, is Zoom the best? Is inviting people to this building the best? Is going out to the community the best? Combination of all the above. So yeah, your thoughts and suggestions.
Yeah, of course. I do need to leave after this meeting today, but I'm of course very happy to take a follow-up on that.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I will try to reach out to you.
Please do. bsteeltransitchicago.com.
Tracy Powell.
I don't have any questions, but thank you for your presentation.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Danielle Stanley.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Sorry, I was a few minutes late. I was just in New York last week and I took the MTA. So it's a big difference with the communications in Chicago. MTA, you have to know what stop you're going off of, and there's no announcement. So that's a tremendous job that Chicago is doing. I did have some questions more about inclusivity. Mainly, it's a lot of seniors that take, transit. They're going up a lot of flights of stairs, and sometimes the elevators are out. How is the communications team, alerting that or identifying what ADA stations are available so that people who need those special accommodations know where to go?
That is a great question. My group has helped put together a framework for that is actually administered by, the CSAs, customer service assistants, at each station, which are the station personnel, they do an hourly check of the elevators to make sure that they're working. Now, in between that, if somebody comes up and says, hey, the elevator's not working, they contact our control center. Our control center then publishes an alert on the website. And we also have the dry erase boards at each station where they're updated hourly. So if I'm at Clark and Lake and I want to use the elevator up on the blue line at Addison and that elevator's out, you'll see it written on that board. But you also see my group put together, we actually did this in conjunction with a previous CTA board member, Kevin Irvine, where we developed a whole system of just elevator outage alerts. So if you go to the CTA website and click on the accessibility tab, you'll see a place for elevator alerts where you get push alerts about elevator outages. So yeah, that's just really important information because, if an elevator goes out, obviously, in the middle of a commute and you're expecting an accessible stop and there's not an accessible stop there, that dramatically impacts your commute. So we try to be as timely as possible with that communication with the hourly check for the elevators. And then within, 5-10 minutes of the CSA being told that the elevator's out at the station, that information will be at minimum up on the dry erase board. And then very shortly thereafter, the elevator will go.
Very good. Like we were all seeing in the news, a lot of migrants are coming to Chicago, transportation. Is the communications team thinking about developing signage in Spanish, so they won't have any issues or trying to navigate the system?
It's a great question. Even before, some of the things that Chicago's been seeing, we've been working on expanding our multilingual signage. We have multilingual signage at a couple locations, but it's not broadly system-wide. It will be broadly system-wide. We're currently developing designs and a framework for multilingual signage wayfinding system-wide. I think some of it's going to start, like, for example, near the Cermak Chinatown stop, we'll probably have signs in Mandarin, possibly Cantonese, signs in Spanish, signs in Polish. I can't remember what other languages we're looking at, but we are definitely planning on doing that. Right now, our website uses Google Translate because it's the easiest and most widely available tool. But we do need and have an effort underway to get the bilingual signage in other locations. Ventra too, Ventra is obviously joined with CTA Metro and PACE, but that signage is becoming.
And then my final question is related to public safety. If there's an incident on the train, how is the communications team communicating with the CPD to, make those alerts more publicly available more quickly?
The way that works now, if someone informs a CTA employee of an imminent safety or security issue, we call the Chicago Police Department, which is the law enforcement provider for CTA. So it doesn't come to our communications department because we're not on the front lines of the real-time operations, right? That's an operations thing. So if a report is made, CPD is contacted. We have you might imagine, a direct line to CPD. CPD, as you probably know, has a dedicated public transportation unit that focuses solely on CTA, officers deployed throughout the system. So that's how, if a customer probably will not email customer service saying, there's a fire or, there's someone, beating someone up or something like that. They would call 911. And we really do encourage our customers for an imminent emergency like that. 911 is the, broad citywide emergency response number and the way to guarantee a really quick response. If for some reason they can't do that and they notify a CTA employee, then we are contacting the emergency responders to get them to respond as quickly.
I appreciate your.
Well, thank you, Mr. Steele. This was amazing. And we will be reaching out to you, just to jump on Carolyn's comment. We definitely want to be more involved with community conversations and just take part of that because we are the community and it's important for us to be in those spaces as well. So
I very much welcome that. Like you, I have some ideas on that as well. One of which, when we relaunch our Ask CTA events, when we're out at the stations talking to customers, would love to have some or all of you there to be a part of.
that would be great. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, so we have one more presentation today, and that is the safety and security presentation with our Chief Safety and Security Officer, Nancy Ellen Zusman, along with members of her team.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You guys okay without taking a bathroom break? Do you want to take a quick break or are you okay?
Do you guys need a couple of minutes? I think we can power through. We've become accustomed to powering.
One thing I will note, I do need to leave sometime between 12:30 and 1, just have some personal stuff after this.
Okay.
I'll tell you what, I'll go through my slide deck and open it up to questions because I know everybody has questions about safety and security. So I'm Nancy Ellen Zusman. I'm the Chief Safety and Security Officer with CTA. I started in August of 2020, so in the middle of the pandemic. My background is I was an attorney with the federal government for 30 years before that. And I spent my last 22 years with the Federal Transit Administration, so I'm steeped in transit. With me today, I have, and you can go to the next slide. I've got two vice presidents that report to me. One is Kevin Ryan, who's the vice president of security, and the other is Jeff Hulbert, who's the vice president of safety. Kevin had a conflict this morning, so I'm joined today with Jeff Hulbert, who's my vice president of safety, and Eddie Winters, who's my general manager of security. Next slide. So, and just from a stand back level, so my department is made up of essentially two areas, safety and security. A lot of people talk about, they use the two words interchangeably. They're not really completely interchangeably. Security is what you think of, I think, more traditionally of events happening on the system where customers or CTA employees may feel they're at risk. Safety is also encompassed by that. And so I just wanted to sort of distinguish that the department is made up of, as I said, security, which is what Eddie covers, and Kevin, which are investigators, analysts, and facilities. And we'll get into that a little bit. You know, it's divided contracts, investigations, and facilities is how the department, that part of the department is divided up. The contracts are what you would expect, the unarmed security contracts. And then just overall CTA security, the CTA cameras, the security guards, the Chicago Police Department, which is made up of, as we discussed, the public transit unit. So the Chicago Police, CTA doesn't have its own police force, as you know. So we're supported by the Chicago Police Department. The police department is divided up with districts, and then additionally a unit that is dedicated to support us. And that's the public transit unit. There is the ability for officers who are off duty to volunteer to work the system. That's the voluntary special employment. We have a memorandum with the Chicago Police Department to allow officers to sign up to work the system and additionally support us. And then we have a security room. That's the SDSC room. Then we have some support that we receive from Cook County through the Sheriff's Department as well. Next slide. So this is kind of an overview of where we have deployments. So we have unarmed security contractors throughout the rail system 24/7, a variety of locations, both trains and in rail stations. We have some on buses, that's more along a pilot, but we have about 400 unarmed security officers throughout the system over 3 shifts. So it's divided up into 3 shifts. We have, as I said, coverage of bus terminals, bus turnarounds during the afternoon hours, selected garages based on employee requests and activity, and securities covering currently now most open rail stations, particularly during the overnight hours. As you know, the red and blue lines run 24 hours. And then we also have a focus on fare evasion and graffiti in the rail yards. Next slide. So the security investigators, they follow up on reported and unreported incidents and criminal activity. We respond with evidence and video requests from all the law enforcement that supports us, state and federal law enforcement as well. They testify in local, state, and federal court hearings related to CTA security events and investigations and incidents. They also prepare wanted and arrest bulletins for external and internal law enforcement purposes, and their liaisons with the local law enforcement. Next slide. The Chicago Police Department Public Transportation section has that primary responsibility for law enforcement services on CTA. That unit is headed up by Commander Joseph Byrd. He's been on running that unit, I want to say, for a little over 2 years. They provide 24/7 coverage of CTA, both uniformed and plainclothes teams. And additionally, we get support from Homeland Security. And then we also they have some canines that are funded through federal grants. So there is some money that's directly, CTA basically is a pass through. So we receive some federal grant money related to primarily terrorist activities that go to the police department. Next slide. Here's just kind of an overview of some of the outreach, kind of give you a little bit of a visual. Slide. So here are some missions and initiatives that CPD has been doing with us. Emergency response drills, which are held at the CTA rail stations, dedicated enforcement teams, the CPD canine patrols throughout the rail system, the return of some bus patrols by special employment units. That's also, as I said, another pilot to provide additional support on the bus system. CTA platform, rail, bus, and facility checks on every watch in every district every day. That's something that the superintendent asked for. As I said, we're divided up geographically, CPD is, and so making sure that each district has a responsibility to also support CTA. SWAT team deployments on the rail system with high visibility patrols. Next slide. And this is some stats related to bus checks and CTA ride checks and L checks that the police department perform. Here's some numbers that was for 2024 year to date. And then the Cook County Sheriff's Office also checks. Next slide. This is, as I mentioned, the voluntary special employment program. CTA in September of 2020 raised the hourly rate from direct hourly rate to time and a half. So we have seen an uptick in officers signing up to do those voluntary shifts. Next slide. This is, as I said, the strategic support room, and they provide real-time responses. So it's basically, it's housed by CPD with detectives. It's 24/7. They have access to all our cameras. We have about 33,000 cameras throughout our system, and they can see, so they can pull up. So if we get a call in that something's happening, they can pull in the cameras for that station and they can see it in real time. Next slide. This is additional support from Cook County Sheriff's Department, which also does some monitoring, controlling of CTA buses and rail locations. And they have patrols in Gresham, Chinatown, the Loop, River North, Austin, and Forest Park. Next slide. And then I want to just touch briefly on safety, which is, when everybody talks about safety on the system, I think they're really talking about security, but I want to talk a little bit about what my safety staff does. So I've got general managers and staff under these areas. So transit safety, which is, so if anything happens, either a bus or rail event, my team goes out and does an investigation. construction, which is, as it sounds, construction projects. So whether it's RPM or other construction projects we're doing throughout the system, we do safety oversight on those. Safety analysis and regulatory oversight. We have a lot of reporting requirements that CTA is required to do. On the rail side, we have Illinois DOT is our state safety oversight agency. So we have certain reporting requirements to IDOT. My team handles that, as well as all the federal reporting requirements, which include everything, a range of things that we're required to do to the National Transit Database. Safety programs and cultures, which is a new area that we staffed up since I started, related to making sure that we are addressing the safety culture. Safety culture is really important, I think, to any organization, to make sure that everybody is concerned about safety. And then occupational safety and environmental compliance is also on the safety side of the house. Next slide. So we've got, as I said, regulatory responsibilities to Illinois DOT on the rail side of the house, not bus, just rail. FTA, which is the Federal Transit Administration, which is our federal funding arm. TSA, Department of Homeland Security, and then Illinois Department of Labor, which is the OSHA complaints. Next slide. So just briefly, we're required to report these types of events. 674 is the section, the regulatory section that requires rail events in these categories to be reported to IDOT. It's a range of things, but that's on the safety side of the house. Next slide. And then I've got two additional responsibilities that I just wanted to mention briefly. I'm the chair of the Joint Labor Safety Committee. So under the infrastructure law, every transit agency was required to organize the Joint Labor Safety Committee. It's made up of 50% management and 50% frontline workers. I staff that. We meet on a quarterly basis. We're required to focus on really three big things: the agency safety plans, so the bus and rail agency safety plans, a reduction of transit worker assaults, and a reduction of vehicle collisions, so collisions involving our buses. I also chair the Executive Safety Committee, which is a regular meeting that I host monthly to talk about safety issues at an executive level. Next slide. That might be it. I think that might be my last slide. So I know I went through this really, really quickly, but I wanted to leave room for questions and kind of give you an overview of who we are. And so I will open it up to questions.
Thank you. That was very helpful, very informative. I just have a couple of questions and then I'll let the rest of the board chime in. You talk about the transit police, and I'm always curious about them because I see them every now and then. But it just seems like there's a gap in that space. So I wanted to know how many positions are allocated and how many are actually filled, and what's being done to kind of like help close that gap.
So there's not a specific number that are allocated. So it fluctuates over time.
Is that based on like the number of events or like?
No. So what we're talking about is the concept of how many dedicated officers under that mass transit unit. And that's a police department decision. So it fluctuates over time. We are in constant communication with Commander Byrd. My vice president, Kevin Ryan, probably talks to him 3 or 4 times a day, and Eddie talks to him as well. So the reality is that they're resource stretched.
Right.
Just like we are.
Yeah.
Which is why the fluctuation. So we get as many officers as we can, and we give them feedback about where we think they should be placed. It is not our police, it's the tension, right?
Yeah.
We haven't had a police force since the 1980s. So this decision was made way before you and I were involved in this. Commander Byrd is extremely responsive. We have, I think that the bus pilots are a really good thing. And trying to, because the rail stations are easier for them to staff, but we are doing some things with the bus pilots. So I can't give you a specific number. Like I said, it fluctuates.
Okay. That's helpful. I mean, maybe, this is another question for the police department, but I also wonder because there's a lot of opportunities for volunteering as well, like what additional incentives are there outside of like time and a half, like to kind of encourage for officers.
So we definitely, by raising that pay rate, we saw an increase in signups.
Okay.
What is sort of a challenge also is like in I think it was when the George Floyd stuff was happening, all of their was canceled, which meant nobody was signing up. So because they make those decisions, we only can request. So, it is obviously we want to encourage signups. I know that Commander Byrd has been very good about encouraging those signups, and we have seen an increase in those signups since raising the pay rate. But, if there's a big event, the reality is that they need to make sure that they're also responding on their side to their needs.
Understood. And one more question regarding Cook County, the Sheriff's Department. You mentioned 6 community areas, and I'm just wondering why those particular areas were chosen.
I think that there was an interface between CTA and the Sheriff's Office, and those were communities that we wanted extra support. We can request. So if to the extent you think that there are areas that we're not focusing on, that we should look for more traditional law enforcement. I mean, obviously the guard contracts were brought in, the guards as an extension of eyes and ears on the system.
I guess I kind of want to know like what supported the decision, like what data was used to kind of like help determine, like was it based on incidences like crime rate? Like what was it that made these 6 community areas stand out? Because I can think of a few that might need a bit more support than River North, but I just want to know like what was.
So I think it probably related to both incidents as well as their resources. But if there are particular neighborhoods that you think that we should also be looking at for Cook County, we can certainly make that request and pass it along.
Okay. Thank you.
Caroline, I know you have to leave, so do you have any questions?
Yeah, I'll probably ask one question. So, I'd like to know about crisis response. So I think in the past couple of years, there's been like an increased attention to like different crisis response. Like if there's, let's say like a mental health related incident on the CTA, what role do you see things like that playing in safety and security?
So obviously I'm aware of what's happening on the system, and I'm aware that there have been, the pandemic has resulted in an increase in unhoused mental health issues. I think personally a level of incivility has increased. It seems like lots more incidents. We have partnered with social service agencies. You have to remember at the end of the day, transportation. We're a community partner, but we're transportation. So CDPH, the Chicago Department of Public Health, they are responsible for some of these issues. At the same time, we're working on bringing in more social service supports. We do have outreach teams that are on the system. I don't know, primarily in the overnight hours. And Haymarket has an office at O'Hare. So it's a challenge. I want to be honest, it's a challenge.
Thank you.
We'll go this way this time. Danielle Stanley.
Yes, thank you so much for your presentation. I had a historical question. I know it predates you, but why did the CTA get rid of their police detail?
I don't know that I'm the best person to answer that because it happened so long ago. I think I'm probably not the right person to answer it. Like I said, it happened a long time ago.
Yeah. And then with the volunteer shifts, with the police officers signing up, has there been a direct correlation with crime reduction on CTA?
Yes, I think that there has. You know, it's hard to prove a negative. So certainly overall crime has gone down.
And then my final question is the unarmed security pilot with the vest. I've seen the announcement on the news, but in reality, I haven't seen them.
You're talking about on the buses?
Yeah, on the trains too. I just haven't really seen.
Well,
them.
you should be seeing them somewhat on the trains. And Eddie, I don't know if you want to talk about sort of the deployments overall in terms of strategy and where we're at.
Yeah, thank you for the question. We do have strategies in place, whereas we're gonna strategically deploy throughout the system. So it all depends on the time and the location that you're referring to as far as you're not being able to see them. And all that is based on the data that we get, some of the calls that may come in, all about intelligence and analysis. Once we gather all that information, we're able to make smarter deployments, and we're moving to make our deployments a lot more fluid now. So again, it all depends on the location.
And their deployment, have that been a direct correlation to crime reduction? Like, have they seen success with this program so far?
I'd say from my time here, 3 months now. Yeah, I just got here.
Yeah.
Just got here. So based on what I've seen and looking at the stats from the previous year, it does appear to be that crime is declining.
Final question on the pilot. When does it sunset?
The bus pilot?
The pilot, yes.
So it's not maybe I misspoke. So use of the guards is not a pilot. The use of the guards on buses as opposed to in rail stations and on trains is not a pilot. So there is no foreseeable sunset. It's really what we can do on the bus side of the house.
Okay, thank you.
Tracy Powell.
Yes, okay, so I'm just gonna piggyback a little bit on something that was asked earlier, but it wasn't really addressed. The CTA and the CPD, like from a citizen's perspective, we don't really know on the security side, like should this be CPD that's security for CTA? And so one of my questions was, do we have funding at the CTA for security? And then the CPD also has funding. Is that combined, or is that just, are they just lending us officers?
So they provide support. CPD provides support through the Mass Transit District.
Okay.
We are paying for the voluntary special employment. So there's budgeted money within CTA's budget for us to get officers to sign up voluntarily.
Okay.
They're directed still by Commander Byrd.
Okay, good.
The unarmed security guards, that's out of CTA's budget.
Okay.
So that's something that CTA made a decision to do. We currently have Intercon and Monterey are the two unarmed security guard companies we have working for us. And then we have Action K9. The Action K9 teams are 2 guards and 1 dog. And that was a contract that we brought in originally through an emergency contract. We have a public procurement for the dog contract, and that should be, it's working through. I think it closes in the next couple weeks. We're taking bids.
And of course, I know money is always an issue, but is there an opportunity to increase funding for security?
So currently, I can tell you what's been in the 2024 budget. It's about $42 million, I think, for the guards. And let me find it. I think it's 42 million for the guards. And what was for CPD? I think it's a total of like 64 million. So yeah, the delta would be for CPD.
CPD 60.
64 total, yes, combined guards and CPD in the 2024 budget.
Okay. Yeah. So, and then my second question was just really to talk about how additional security is deployed to maybe those 5 neighborhoods that we saw.
Right. So that was with the Cook County Sheriff's Department.
That's with the Cook County Sheriff. But the question that I had was, is that like a data-driven decision made, like more crimes in this particular area, or is it just kind of, I don't know, how's that?
Probably a combination of both their available resources as well as data.
Well as data.
But if there's other neighborhoods that you think that we should be asking them to cover, to the extent they have resource, you know, everybody's got resource constraints. So it's what they have available.
Thank you.
Ryan Parnell.
Yeah, I think also piggybacking off this, just questions about like how, it seems like CTA is kind of working with CPD. So how are you evaluating their performance or the effectiveness of this partnership? Like are you looking at arrests or customer sentiment or what statistics are you looking at?
So, I mean, we do get numbers from them on a regular basis. So we're aware of, response times, arrests, pulling guns off the system, writing tickets for smoking. So there are a number of metrics that we're looking at that we see from them on a regular basis.
Okay, if I could ask specifically about the data you gave us here, like the service calls, it's divided into like bus check, CTA ride, L check. You describe those categories. I'm just like specifically like CTA ride versus L check versus L platform check. I'm not sure.
So,
Okay.
so I'm going to let Eddie go ahead and answer this.
Okay, so when you talk about bus check, that's basically doing a voluntary special employment program. So that would be when the officers would ride behind the buses and they would get out and just do their checks, and then they would ride with the operator for a certain amount of time. So when you talk about the CTA ride on view, that would also the OV, that's what that means, on view. Also, that may not necessarily be part of their program, meaning their assignment to ride the bus. They may have just on viewed an incident that have taken place, and then they would jump on the bus and just ride as well. Because at the beginning of their shift, when you're talking about the bus checks, they're given a certain amount of buses that they need to ride. And so that would be the difference between those two. The L check, exactly the exact same thing, riding the Ls. Well, platform check, the officers would come down on the platform and do a walkthrough, inspect things, inspect the crime conditions. And that's about it if I answered your question correctly.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up question about on view? I just want to make sure I understand what that. It's basically the officer witnesses something and then makes a determination as to whether or not they should jump on the.
Yes.
Okay.
Or a citizen pulls them over and said, hey, something just happened, right?
Okay.
So it's like immediate right there.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess the reason I'm pressing a little bit on these statistics specifically is, I think a lot of times these security guards or CPD, if I see them, it's at the station. But on the trains themselves, my personal experience is never seeing anyone intervening, sometimes I see the people in the yellow vest. I don't think I've ever seen like a CPD officer on the train itself, where I think for me and people I talk to and my friends and stuff, that's where the problems tend to occur, not so much at the station. So I think, if we're representing the views of the citizens, maybe that could be an area of priority is on the, having that presence on the train or improving
visibility.
Or just the feeling of security on the train that people have or responsiveness. Because I think a lot of times that's where you're you're kind of trapped on this train, at least until the next stop. And
Right.
if that sense of security on the train, I think is vital to increasing ridership of the CTA. So that would be, I guess, my recommendation. And that's all I have.
Ryan McCray.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation today. I'm sure the Safety and Security Department is one of the most in-demand ones at CTA to talk to. And so your time's valuable and thank you for speaking with us. I wanted to start, I guess, on the safety side. I'll bring up the yellow line and its crash earlier. And I believe the delay to getting that line back in service was around 40 days. Is that right?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, so like people, frankly, when they're driving their private vehicles, right? Tens of people are dying on Chicago streets, not through crime. They're just driving through private transportation, like collisions, through bad driving. And we're not shutting down the roads themselves. So I see a 40-day like deletion of someone's commute line as a very long delay for something that I don't think led to any hospitalizations even.
So it did lead to hospitalizations and it's under investigation by the National Transportation Safety Board. So there's a level of oversight. An event like that happens, NTSB comes in and we have to follow their direction to a certain extent. They took over the investigation. So there are reasons why we delayed as long as we did reopening the system. We wanted to make sure that when we reopened that the system was safe. Not that it wasn't safe, but NTSB came in, they did their preliminary investigation. There were things that we did. We did drop the speeds of trains on the yellow line before we reopened. We looked in the area. You wanted to rule out any possible causes that needed to be immediately addressed prior to reopening.
So we're still not sure what caused it.
So I can't talk publicly, unfortunately, about something that's under investigation by the NTSB. I mean, you know what the NTSB is. Obviously, you hear a plane crash. They also have jurisdiction over events like this, and that's what happened. So they put out a specific preliminary investigation report. Is that what? Yeah.
Correct.
So, and that's a public document. So, I'd have to go back and read specifically, but the bottom line is that we felt safe reopen and that's what we did.
Okay, thank you. Going back over to security then, I had some questions about the volunteer force. Are they only retired officers?
No, they're not retired.
Okay.
They're regular officers that are volunteering to work the system on their off hours.
Okay, and CPD determines the number of officers in the transit unit.
Correct.
And then the officers themselves can volunteer to be on this force.
So the officers can so there's a dedicated unit that supports.
Dedicated, like with the fluctuations of the police.
Right.
Okay.
However, additional officers that aren't assigned to that unit can volunteer basically for extra work. So, and CTA pays for that. We pay time and a half.
Mm-hmm.
So if Officer Joe was off on Saturday and he wanted to make some extra money and support CTA, he could sign up for a shift. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. No, I like that overtime myself. Yeah, it sounds good. Yeah, okay. I guess I'd like to ask about the guards in the transit stations. They're partially worried about fare evasion. And these guards are funded by the CTA's budget, right?
Correct.
Has there been a study to see if the amount we're paying these officers is actually profitable, like with their time spent in enforcing fare evasion?
So they're not just doing fare evasion. They're an extension of the eyes and ears of CTA workforce. So they're a force multiplier. So they're allowed to both be a deterrent because of their presence, as well as potentially de-escalate a situation. We have targeted fare evasion as one of the things that we'd like to see them address, because we know from sort of a number standpoint that a lot of the people that commit crime on the CTA started with not paying a fare. So if, to the extent you can keep those bad actors off the system, that reduces crime
Okay, is there,
as a strategy.
yeah, is there a percentage for like what percent of fare evaders go on to commit a crime?
I don't know that it's been a direct correlation. But I think anecdotally, that's, Eddie's past is as a CPD officer, so I think it's fair to say that a lot of the people that commit crime started with fare evading to get onto the system.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. And again, then finally, this was kind of a big talk when this board was first appointed, but people would like some kind of number to text for these security conflicts like on the bus and train. Is there any movement around that?
So we are rolling out a chatbot.
Right. My understanding of that is that's not to do with.
It's not immediate. No, it's not immediate. And if anybody says, and I know you asked Brian about this too, if there's an emergency, you really do need to call 911. So that's going to be your most immediate feedback that something's going on, is to call 911.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. But those are my questions.
Peter Henderson?
Great presentation. Appreciate all three of you. And me personally, I take the train a lot, especially at night. And for the unarmed security guards, I don't think they do their job all enough, because we say that we want safety and security, and we want all the people to stay on the blue line and red line and feel safe. And if somebody's arguing down there on the platform and I'm just standing there watching them and they going at it, he's standing there listening to music on his phone, not paying no attention, just sitting down. So, and that kind of raised a red flag for me, because you guys are given a budget to pay these people to make sure that the city of Chicago and for CTA is safe, and they're not watching and doing their job. What kind of things are y'all doing? Because I look at that and myself, I put myself in their shoes, I feel unsafe, even watching that. And I'm looking at, okay, y'all supposed to be there. If you're not there, what are we doing? You know what I mean?
So we are auditing, and Eddie's can talk about, yeah.
So what we're doing right now is we're changing how we're dealing with situations. There's more accountability. We have analysts now, and these analysts are conducting audits different ways physically, and they're also watching them on the through the camera system. What's also happening is that I'm out on the system myself, doing random checks, spot checking, and just making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do. Paying a lot more closer attention to the reporting that's coming in, such as these here. And we are reaching out to those particular companies, security companies, and giving them feedback as to what it is that we're getting. We have complete meetings now with each company. So as we identify guards who aren't, performing, we're asking that these get more training. Or if if it appears that they're not up for that, we're asking that they move into another part of the system, whereas that would be more suitable for them.
And in the most egregious situations, we have asked that guards be removed from the contract and not work the system at all. Yeah. So I want you to understand, we are holding them accountable, as Eddie said. It's hard to see them all at every second that they're out there, but we are doing more to address that. And to the extent you see a guard that you think is not performing, if you could let us know, certainly with a time and a location, we can pull the cameras and we can identify which guard that was, and we can ask that they be removed from the contract. So there is no excuse for them to be paid for not doing their job. And I 100% agree with you. So if you can give us feedback, we will make sure it gets addressed.
Definitely, I will. That answers all my questions. But again, thank you for that presentation. I appreciate y'all.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo that. I think it's kind of unclear to me like what the goal of the unarmed security guards is, because I think the only times I've ever seen them on the system is they're often in like big groups. So there's maybe like 6 or 7 all on one train car. They're not really walking around. They're on their phones. They're talking to each other. So I guess it's somewhat unclear what the goal of having them on the trains is. I think one of the things that we've seen surveys, and when they survey regular riders, one of the biggest things is one of the biggest like ways to make people feel safer is to have more service. Obviously, that's not under your purview, but I think what goes with that is it's about having other people with you, right? Like you're not going to feel unsafe if you have, 3 or 4 or 5 other people in the car with you. And I think that maybe that's one of the goals of the unarmed security guard program is to have just an increased presence of people who are there to support riders. I think that's to me the biggest thing that would make me feel safer. I think I speak for a lot of people is if there's just more presence. And it doesn't necessarily have to be police officers, but people who are there to support riders. A big place of concern that I have personally is the red line, blue line tunnel at Jackson. I know people personally who have been jumped there. There's not really an exit point, right? It's a really long tunnel. You have one end and the other end, and that's the only like escape points. So that's like, but I really never see people, patrolling there or walking there. And then the third thing I wanted to say is there a way to have, like what should we do as riders if there's like minor violations like smoking that we see? Because that's not necessarily something that I want to call 911 for, right? Because it's not something that, I don't want to take resources away from them for like a violent crime. But is there another way that we can, for minor violations like that, is there something else that we can do as riders to sort of prompt a response to that kind of thing?
Do you want to talk about the red blue line tunnel?
Yeah, I'll talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when we get information like that, we are focusing on redeploying, especially to areas like that you mentioned that I just wasn't aware of. One of the things that we recently have done is we redeployed our Action K9 security team that was operating more so, I think, northwest, and we moved them closer to now they're handling that station that you're referring to. And this happened, I want to say about 2 weeks ago. So we started that. So it's my hope that we'll continue to get the feedback, but at the same time, ensure that folks feel a little bit safer and that the incidents do go down.
For the smoking, it is a challenge. I will acknowledge it is a challenge. The police are writing tickets, but that I don't think, it's a challenge. I'm not gonna not be transparent about that. I think certainly the chatbot is going to be one way to do that. I know that the chatbot is going to receive those smoking complaints and we're going to have to figure out a strategy. Certainly we will keep track. It's the tension, right? Of do we want to hold a train because somebody's smoking and impact all the other commuters on that train? I think to your point about having other people on the system, you're absolutely right. It got worse during the pandemic because nobody was on the trains except people who not choice riders, but needed to get places and didn't have a car. And so it's a struggle. It is a code of conduct violation. There's no question. And the reality is marijuana became legal in 2020 in the state of Illinois. So it is that struggle to address these quality of life issues. We're aware of it. And if there are other strategies or then guards and officers that you all can come up with, I welcome other mitigation opportunities. I attended a transit security conference that RTA put on, I think a week or 2 ago, and was listening to how other cities, we're constantly talking to our peers. Are there other ideas that we could implement here? And
I mean, I think a first step for me is like, I think a lot of people are unclear about what to do because you don't want to press like there's this, operator.
Right.
You don't want to press that. Because
Sure.
you want to stop the train. You don't want to call the police because you don't want to stop the train.
Sure.
I think maybe a first step is have some sort of way to collect data on that. So maybe there's a specific line.
We do.
Okay.
Customer complaints on that.
Hmm.
We certainly keep track of that. So, certainly people can do it through the feedback.
Okay.
And you will be able to do it through the chatbot tool.
Okay.
Can I just add, before we go to Rob, one way that I've been thinking about doing this is like if on warmer days, if the train, like the little ventilation windows at the top of the windows can like make opens so that at least there's fresh air coming in the train. I don't know if that's something that's reasonable or whatever, but I'm always like sitting there, I'm like, dang, I wish I could open one of these windows and maybe, it could kind of ventilate some of that out so that at least I'm not sitting there inhaling all of this the whole ride. But that's just a quick thought I had that.
Rob Johnson?
Thank you all for your time. I had a few questions actually. When you mentioned that there are over 400 personnel 24/7 a day, is
Over the 3 shifts.
over the 3 shifts, is that
Those are the guards.
and so just CPD, just the
No, those are unarmed guards. that number is the unarmed.
just the unarmed guards? Okay. And then and I guess this is part of my confusion, I guess, is I see, different levels of security or different, there's a police officer, there's a guard. And when we talk unarmed guards, are we talking about the program we've seen recently where they mentioned, the people in like the yellow vests
Or
that,
the yellow vests.
okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Those are the guards. Those are the unarmed guards.
okay. Are there different, and maybe this is a dumb question, is there different levels?
No such thing as dumb question.
Wait for it now. Are there different levels of, I guess, police authority between, a CPD officer on the transit system and then obviously an unarmed security guard as far as, detainment, ticketing, arrest? I imagine in my head, one has a much broader range, a broader breadth of authority than the other, but is that a wrong assumption or?
No, it's a correct assumption. So the guards are not law enforcement.
Okay.
So they are a way to call the control center and say, hey, I have a smoker on car 5430 at State and Lake. They have that ability to call the control center.
Got it.
Only law enforcement, which is CPD or somebody from the sheriff's office that carries a gun, has that authority to arrest, detain, write a ticket. So even the guards are not writing tickets.
Okay. Because I've seen.
I told you not a dumb question.
I've firsthand, it's an anecdote, of course. I've seen situations where there've been 1 or 2 guards in the same car as me, and there's someone smoking. And in this particular incident, I've never felt older in my life. My kid was with me, and I'm getting like especially worked up about this.
Right.
But the guard doesn't do anything. And I think on one hand, yes, you have a job that you need to be doing. On the other hand, the person smoking was also like pretty outwardly confrontational as well.
Right. Right.
And I think that unarmed guard in that instance is in a pretty tough situation. I don't have an answer for that, but I think part of it is there are probably some people, I'm not trying to paint with a broad brush or anything, but you mentioned it earlier, and I tend to agree that there seems to be an increase in antisocial behavior. I think there's people that figured that out. Like, this guy's not going to do anything. Like, these people aren't going to do anything.
So they have de-escalation training.
Interesting. Okay.
So,
Well, they didn't escalate it.
So they're probably doing the same calculus in their head about, is this gonna go south if I try and stop this person who looks. So when you say they didn't do anything, you don't 100% know whether they contacted the control center.
That's 100, that's fair.
That for sure they should have done. You, if you felt uncomfortable and you saw them, you can walk up to them and say, hey, there's a guy over there. Can you at least contact the control center? I don't want to stop the train. I don't want to, do anything that's going to stop my entire commute with my kid. But can you at least contact the control center? And that allows, if there are resources available, to potentially, but you're going to run the risk of the train being stopped 1 or 2 stations down the line, and maybe CPD officers
Or waiting.
are waiting to escort them off the train.
No, I mean, that's very helpful, right?
In a perfect world, that is what I would want to be able to happen. We are not in a perfect world yet, but that isn't a reason for us not to try and figure out things that we maybe can do to address those situations.
That's super helpful. Because in my head, I was like, why isn't he doing anything? And then also in my head, I was like, he probably can't do anything. And when I say he can't do anything,
Well, and if he was by himself,
the guy.
right,
Yeah.
well, he can't write a ticket, but if he was by himself, he may have not even been on duty. He may have been going to his duty station or coming home, because they should be at least in pairs. They shouldn't be in the giant
it was-
groups. Okay, it was a pair. Okay. So,
So, like,
yeah, no, absolutely.
Okay. That's helpful. And then I had regarding the relationship between like CPD and staffing and the voluntary officer program.
Special employment, yeah.
So I know way back when I was in City Hall, there was like an IGA agreement.
There is an IGA agreement, yep.
And is that for the voluntary, or is that for the standard CPD patrol?
No, it's for the voluntary special employment. Yep, that's the mechanism we use to raise the rates from time to time and a half, which we did in September of 2020.
Got it. Okay. You mentioned, for example, a George Floyd and the reaction to that, and how it put an enormous strain on scheduling, which, waterfall effect put a strain on the voluntary service program. Do you see, I guess in my head, we have major events all the time in the city.
Sure.
Do you find it difficult? I would also imagine those are times when there's probably a little more activity on the, like, good and
Right.
on the system. Do you find those, because of whatever CBA requirements, rest provisions, whatever the reason may be, that is a harder time to staff up through the voluntary provisions? Or
I think it really depends what CPD is doing with its time off.
Got it.
Are they canceling time off for their officers?
Got it.
But they're also aware of CTA's needs. So it might be that we're not getting the volunteers, but the superintendent makes a decision to provide additional officers to Commander Byrd. So, I don't want to speak for CPD.
Fair.
We can make that request. We can certainly make that request.
Okay. I just wonder about this, and you guys, this program's been around for a while, so I assume that there's.
I think the biggest step was raising that pay, right? Because we had sort of,
and that
wasn't a financial incentive for people to sign up. So in September of 2020, we raised 22, we raised the rates.
And with that level of pay, I think just in my head, does it help with the consistency of staffing? I guess what I'm getting at is, if you, arbitrary numbers, if you have like 2 officers available one night and then 100 the next night, I almost feel like that's worse than having like 15.
Consistently, yeah. I mean, it's voluntary, so we can control it.
Okay.
But I would imagine it's not gonna It's not going to go from 2 and then 100 the next day, just not going to. I think it really has more to do again with their resources, even more than, so it's our needs and their resources.
Right.
So we can make those requests, whether they can honor them or not is a call for them to make.
But you guys just generally feel like it's going well.
I think it's a good relationship. I think it's a really, really good relationship. I think,
Just trying to like think through it.
yeah, Commander Bird, I mean, you can look at their social media. He's good at posting on social media. So I would encourage you to take a look at some of his social media posts. He's, you know, really had a good presence in the station.
And I guess this is leading to, a big event that's happening later this summer.
Gee, what event? Yes.
To me, that's like the first,
Yes, and
we talk about it a lot.
sure.
Are you guys getting extra assistance from federal level, from city level?
So there are discussions about security. So we certainly have, you know, involvement in the planning that's going on.
Okay. Thank you. And then I had one last question. Sorry, it's a hard turn. You know, there was allegedly a pretty heinous incident that happened on the Purple Line. And it's not my place to say you should have done X, Y, Z. I guess my question is, you know, I think about it all the time, actually, where I have some degree of privilege where if I'm on the CTA, I'm minding my own business, people generally tend to leave me alone, right? But when I hear about incidents like what happened to that girl, is there like a protocol in place? Are there procedures to, you know, not just like, oh, make sure this never happens again, but I mean, to kind of instill that trust for ridership in general, but like women that may be riding that particular route or anything like that? Is there kind of like a, I don't want to use the word postmortem, but kind of.
So I think that always looking for campaigns that catch people's attention to address some of that egregious behavior. We worked with communications on a campaign about humanizing our employees because transit worker assaults, I feel really strongly we need to figure out a way to address. What happened was really awful. But awful things unfortunately are happening everywhere. There was that awful situation in Philadelphia where someone was raped on the system and no fellow customer did anything. They used their phones.
Yeah.
So it's figuring out what we can do to communicate what's acceptable and what's not. And if you have good campaign suggestions, like I said, I thought that the humanizing of our workers, you know, they're there to do their job, not to take abuse. So to the extent that there are campaigns that you all come up with that you think that we should look at to send that message, you know.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe again.
And to the woman as a female writer,
right.
I understand what you're talking about. And I know that there are other peer agencies that also have looked at this issue. And are there things that we can do, you know, better lighting in stations? You know, so that you're not just lighting right in the middle of the night. You want to make sure there's lighting throughout the whole platform, because where the train stops and where somebody might want to get on because that's where the head car is, where the operator is, that might not be as well lit. We're looking at that stuff all the time. So to the extent you've got additional suggestions, we welcome them.
Yeah. This is not my area of expertise at all. And I know maybe this veers towards like the optics, but perhaps like that's something where if I'm a rider of the Purple Line, like I want to see more eyes in the aftermath of an incident like that, right? Because it's human nature. You're probably gonna be like looking around.
Correct.
Yeah, so I don't know. I'm not saying that's the answer.
We can increase
Yeah.
deployments to your point.
Yeah.
No.
Okay, thank you.
I had one point to piggyback on a point that Nancy Ellen made to you about just reporting things as well. If you did like your personal experience and you happen to be on car and you're next to security, we can engage them to see if they've spoken to control. Even if you're not immediately adjacent to somebody like that, one thing that I tell lots of people is to be mindful of the rail car number that you're on.
Yeah.
Some people don't know that all the time, but then that helps too, because even if you go to a different car or you get off, you run into CTA personnel later, you can still report that even if it's not in real time. You can be able to still provide information that can help us in different ways.
Thank you.
Emmanuel Garcia.
My question is, do you guys like tend to put more security around rail stations that are near schools? Because from what I've seen is that, there's 3 high schools located near, the rail station State and Lake and Washington and Wabash, where there's high volumes of students riding the lines, and sometimes there's like no security on platforms or sometimes no guards at all. And I just see sometimes students fighting. I don't know if you guys heard about like a student getting stabbed in the Washington and Wabash station as well. And as well, like sometimes when the box office person is not there, I just see students just jumping the
turnstile.
turnstile.
Yeah. Do you want to? We can certainly look at the high school.
Yeah, we can look at the high schools. As we get the information, we could use that information as far as our deployments. But one of the things I do know about the schools that you're referring to is that the dean of students there, they were utilizing some of their staff to go to the stations and help them at dismissal times. But we hadn't been requested to provide any additional security there.
Thank you for coming today, and I commend you all for taking on this massive responsibility of keeping riders safe, right? In a difficult time in safety history, right? I did an interview with a media outlet a few months ago regarding safety, and my conclusion was kind of what yours was earlier, and this is transportation, right? We're not public health, we're not police, and the complexity of what you all have to deal with, seeing as how CPD has a budget for keeping CTA safe, and you're providing an extra $64 million. And we're using words like support and volunteer, right? Like when you put that amount of resources behind safety to hear.
Oh, and the 64 is for the police too. So it's yeah.
I get it. But I guess my point is as we're the Citizens Advisory Board, right? When we hear that amount of resources going into something, and yet the responses we're getting, well, it's up to their capacity. It's up to what, all of these moving pieces. So I just want to recognize the complexity of that and say, as a Citizens Advisory Board, most of us are here because of safety issues, right? I think personally, and that's something that we can discuss post this conversation in today's meeting, but I would love to hear more about why the CTA police force was removed, how much that cost back in the day, and how much it would cost now. And I only say that because, right, we have, being as somebody who's understanding of what's happening in Chicago with the police and even being pro-police, we have lots of officers leaving the police force. Well, maybe they would want to join CTA police full time, right? Maybe there is something there, and I don't know. It's just a matter of information, right? But I do have one suggestion though, right? In community, when the police have issues, they never go to security firms. In the community, when police have issues, they go to street outreach organizations, right? Over the last 5-6 years, both private and public dollars have spent hundreds of millions of dollars to professionalize street outreach workers. We had an incident last weekend over on Roosevelt and Canal with a large youth gathering. And who did you see there that evening and the next day? You didn't see police. Well, you did see some police, but holding it down. You didn't see security firms. You saw street outreach groups. And so I wonder, because typically CPD is not going to contract with street outreach groups, but to the point that was made earlier, more transportation. I know from an effective standpoint, when you're working with street outreach groups, you have people who are already familiar with issues and community. And so I think a lot of that is preventative because there's already existing relationships. And there's also a sense of understanding that these individuals are from our community. They understand what's going on. So I wonder if there's a conversation there between, Communities Partnering for Peace, which is like the citywide coalition of street outreach groups, and the needs that we have within our CTA system around extra support around preventative measures for safety.
We can certainly take a look at that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for the presentation today. We really appreciate you all spending the time. This is a very important conversation and we hope to have continued dialogue around this. We very much appreciate you spending the day, the last hour at least.
Well, thank you. I hope everybody enjoys their weekend.
Thank you.
I know that we're over time, but I just want to say a couple of things in this space. That Rob and I have been having a couple of conversations just about the direction of our board, and we wanted to make sure that we shared a couple of these thoughts with you so that the next time we convene, there will be space for us to continue these conversations. So real quickly, we just want to get your thoughts, not today, but maybe in another format such as a survey. And we'll kind of figure out how to move from there. But we wanted to think about the cadence of our meetings. Right now we're meeting quarterly. We wanted to, consult with you all about like the frequency so that we can have more opportunities to have conversations and think about our presence in the community. So just that's something to keep in mind. We also, as we were listening to the presentations today, we definitely want to have more of a presence in the community. So what could that look like? Does that mean that we're partnering with, the communications team or others to have more of a presence and be part of some of the engagements that CTA is doing? Then what topics of discussion do we want to have when we're in those public spaces with the community? We all know that safety is definitely a big one for us, but there are other areas that we might want to take interest in that might not be as, intense. We might want to think about arts and culture and how that fits into CTA. There's a number of things that we could take part in. Subcommittees, there's room for us to think about that as well. Like we all have come to this table with different interests. So if you all have ideas for that, there is room for us to think about that as well. And then one thing that I think would be important to give us some guidance as we move through this second half of our term is really thinking about our mission as a board. Like what collectively do we want to see and how do we want to support the CTA and our leadership, by making sure that there's a better connection to our residents, our riders. How do we make sure that we are part of that and, using our genuine concern to help be more informative and be that conduit between the communities and the CTA leadership. So those are just some, quick ideas that we've had. We don't need to respond to them today because we're already over time, but definitely think about them. And if you have any thoughts or anything that you want to share with us, please, feel free to reach out. Again, we'll be reaching out to you guys with possibly a survey, but we wanted to at least get that out there today. So thank you, guys. Outside of that new business, is there any other new business to consider?
Chairperson Raby, there's no other new business.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Greenlee. And so I am going to call adjournment. May I have a motion to adjourn? Okay,
I will second.
It's been moved by Robert Castaneda and seconded by Peter Henderson that the meeting be adjourned. We'll do a roll call vote. Robert Castaneda,
Yes.
Rob Johnson,
Yes.
Chairperson Raby,
yes.
Peter Henderson,
Yes.
Brian McCray,
Yes.
Tracy Powell,
Yes.
and Danielle Stanley.
Yes.
The motion passes.
All right, I get to use the gavel. The meeting is adjourned.
Boring of that.
Thanks, everyone.